What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sportser. In this video, I will be showing you guys my Big Ten college football predictions. So this will be the standings for all 14 teams, and then we'll move on to the awards. So we're going to hop right into this, starting with the standings. So we'll look at the East first. I want to talk about the top of the East a little bit later. So we're going to go ahead and move to Michigan and Michigan State. Michigan, they've got a new quarterback. They lost their top wide receiver. They've lost a bunch, but this team has the chance to be good because Michigan's always going to have a bunch of talent, and this year is no different. So I think this team has the potential to maybe win some games that they aren't supposed to win, but they're not going to be a serious threat to Ohio State or Penn State. Next, Michigan State. Michigan State, they've never been scoring a bunch of points on offense. It's always their defense that keeps them in games, and this year is going to be no different. They're going to not score a bunch of points on offense as usual, and their defense is going to be what keeps them within a range to actually win their games, because their defense is really just what holds them in there. So next up, Indiana. They had a great year last year. Well, they didn't have a great year, but it was a very promising year for the offense specifically. Michael Penix Jr. actually forced Peyton Ramsey to transfer out, and we'll be talking about Peyton Ramsey a little bit later. But Penix Jr. actually forced Ramsey to transfer out because he was so good, and Peyton Ramsey is one of the best Indiana quarterbacks ever. So Penix is going to be really good, and he's got Indiana in a good situation. They just don't have a bunch of talent outside of him, and they've got a couple decent receivers, and they've got a couple solid guys on defense, but it's just not really a complete team. So they're not going to win a whole bunch of games. And tied in 6th place, we have Maryland and Rutgers. So neither of these teams are going to be very good this year. Talia Tagovailoa is going to be Maryland's likely starting quarterback in Week 1. He is listed as a co-starter, but I have a feeling that he's probably going to be the one starting. So, Maryland, they were horrible at the quarterback position last year. So, Talia hopefully can bring them some light and help them out, maybe win a game or two. But, this just isn't a very good team. They got a really good recruit in Raheem Jarrett, 5-star wide receiver. So, Talia will have a great target to spend some of his Maryland career with. And the other 6th place team, Rutgers. Rutgers, they hired Greg Schiano, but he hasn't had a chance to build this program. Obviously, they're only in year 1, so this team is not going to be very good this year, just like they have been over the past 5-10 years. So now we're going to go back to Ohio State and Penn State. Ohio State, they did lose a few players to opt-outs, but all of those main guys opted back in. Shaun Wade, Wyatt Davis, those guys. So that is really good for Ohio State that they had these guys opt back in. But, they lost some pieces. They lost J.K. Dobbins, Chase Young, Jeff Okudah. They lost a bunch of good players off of last year's playoff team. But I think they should still be the rulers of the Big Ten this season. And number 2, Penn State. Last couple of weeks, month or so, have not been good for Penn State. So first, once we know that the Big Ten is coming back, we hear that Micah Parsons will not play. So Micah Parsons opted out. And then a few days ago, it was announced by the school that Journey Brown has a medical condition that will likely keep him out for the entire season. Parsons, All-American linebacker, and Journey Brown is their leading rusher. So that is not good news for Penn State. They're missing arguably their 2 best players, but they have a bunch of talent around the team. Obviously, great defense, but this offense, Sean Clifford and Pat Freiermuth, that's going to be a very special connection this year. Former 5-star Noah Cain at running back. This team has a bunch of potential, and I actually was really close to picking them over Ohio State and winning the Big Ten East. That would have completely changed my predictions, but I kept Penn State in the number 2 slot at a 7-1 record. So now over to the West, Minnesota 7-1. I don't feel like Minnesota is going to be as good as they were last year. And, this record may not really signify that, but they don't have a bunch of really tough games. They play in the weaker of the two divisions, so they do have that going for them. But, they just don't have a bunch of losable games. So I've got them going 7-1. The connection between Tanner Morgan and Rashad Bateman is really scary, even without Tyler Johnson, who they had last year. And they did lose a running back, but they'll still have a solid rushing attack, and their defense will be solid as well. It's a very solid, sound team all around. PJ Fleck is a great coach over there in Minnesota. Number 2, Wisconsin, 5-3, probably seems like a little bit of a down year. But keep in mind, if we had out-of-conference games, that's likely a 9-3 record. So you just have to remember that these are all conference games, and they're playing against a bunch of really good teams. So 5-3, I feel like that's a little bit lower than what I expected for the Wisconsin. I actually came into this expecting Wisconsin to be my prediction to win the the Big Ten West, but it didn't work out that way. Their schedule is a little bit less favorable than Minnesota's because they get Michigan on the road, Wisconsin does, and Minnesota gets Michigan at home. So that's kind of beneficial. That was one of the difference makers. And it should just be really interesting. Those two are definitely a step above, or at least one step above, the rest of their division. Over to Iowa, they lost their starting quarterback, Nate Stanley, to the NFL. So replacing him should be challenging, but they have a bunch of talent. Kirk Ferentz, he is known for producing tight ends, offensive linemen, and a bunch of defensive players. And this year is going to be no different. Tight ends, O-line, and defense. That's how Iowa wins games. But I am kind of concerned about their quarterback position, now moving on from Nate Stanley. Now to the 4-way tie for 4th place. We'll start with Nebraska. Nebraska, ever since Scott Frost came over there, they've been this team that's been hyped up every single year. And this year I feel, and I'm probably going to sound stupid for saying this because they've been awful the past couple of years, I think they're slightly underrated coming into the season. I think this is finally going to be Adrian Martinez's year to step up and show what we all thought he could be as a freshman, as a sophomore. I think this is his chance, his time to shine. So he's going to help Nebraska out. And, they've just got other young guys around the team developing that are now going to be in a win-now mode. So Nebraska, I think, is going to be a much improved team this year. 3-5, that's not the prettiest record. But once again, you have to consider the schedule. And Illinois, next up, they still have Brandon Peters at quarterback. He is a former Michigan transfer. He played really nice for them last year, led them to a bowl game, and that's sort of Illinois' goal again this year because they're never going to be a team that's contending for their division. That's just not what Illinois is. But they can be a solid team. Last year they upset Wisconsin. If they could get another win like that this year, that'd be really, really good for the program, just having that confidence, knowing that you can win these big games just as a program, as a team, would really be beneficial. But I think Illinois has a chance to potentially get up to a 500 record this year, 4-4. But as you can see, I have my projection at 3-5. It should be pretty interesting, though. I think Illinois is a good team, but they're not really great or good enough to really contend with the Minnesota, Wisconsin type schools. Next, Northwestern. This is where Peyton Ramsey transferred. I talked about him earlier when we were talking about Indiana. So Peyton Ramsey, one of the best quarterbacks in Indiana Hoosiers history as far as numbers and as far as play on the field goes. He's had some injuries, and Michael Penix Jr. is just really, really good. So Northwestern, they really were bad at quarterback last year. Clemson transfer Hunter Johnson was supposed to be this star, but he was nothing close to that. So Ramsey is going to come in and he'll be the starter, And, he's going to be one of their better quarterbacks. Definitely the best quarterback on the roster. So, next up, Purdue. Purdue, this is an interesting team. They have a bunch of weapons for, to get the ball spread to, but the defense isn't very good. It's just weird, Purdue especially, because they have a couple standout players, but then they don't really have a bunch of other players that are that good. And, that's why Purdue is never very good. It's just because they're not a very complete team. They have Rondale Moore. They have Bell at receiver. But, outside that, they just don't have a bunch more of those big-name guys. And, to be a really good team, you have to have a lot of those guys. And on offense, those are the only two I can think of. And, especially on offense, that's super important in the Big Ten, especially. But Purdue, they're just not a very complete team. I feel like they're solid, though. They're going to win some games for sure. And as you can see, I have them tied with Nebraska, Illinois, and Northwestern. So they must be doing something right if they're in a 4-way tie. All right, now over to the awards predictions. So I've got Justin Fields listed as my Big Ten MVP. This shouldn't surprise anybody, but if it does, let me know in the comments why. Fields is arguably the best player in college football. That title probably goes to Trevor Lawrence, but Fields is definitely up there. And I also have him as my Offensive Player of the Year. Defensive Player of the Year, I have Jayson Oweh from Penn State. So Yeturgos Matos is up to the NFL, and Penn State needs their next guy to step up. And I feel like Jayson Oweh is the guy, so it should be pretty interesting. He is insanely athletic. He's just a freak, and, he should be able to wreak some havoc for that Penn State defensive line. Rookie of the Year, Maryland wide receiver Raheem Jarrett. He's in a great situation. He has Talia Tagovailoa as his quarterback, and he's going to get a bunch of playing time very, very early in his career. So that's why I have him as my Offensive Rookie of the Year and my Rookie of the Year as well. Defensive Rookie of the Year, Joey Porter, Penn State corner. He redshirted last year, and now he is listed as a starter. He's super talented, and I expect him to have a very big season, as you can see. Coach of the Year, James Franklin from Penn State. He never gets enough recognition, I don't feel like, for being as good of a coach as he is, because Penn State's always just a step short of the college football playoff. And I feel like that's what people think about when they think of James Franklin. They think of not being able to make the college football playoff, and not, his team is always really close to making the college football playoff. So James Franklin, I think he's going to win Big Ten Coach of the Year this year. And my Big Ten championship prediction, I've got Ohio State over Minnesota. This should not surprise anybody. These are probably going to be, I'd say, the two most likely teams in the championship. But, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Penn State, Wisconsin, Penn State, Minnesota. There's about two teams on each side that I would say have a realistic chance at making the Big Ten championship. And Game MVP Justin Fields, once again, should not surprise anybody. But that's all I've got for this Big Ten preview. Games start on Friday, as Penn State will take on Indiana. So that should be good. Penn State, week 1, without Micah Parsons, without Journey Brown. Should be interesting. But let me know in comments what you thought about my predictions. Ohio State or Penn State, I'm really curious to see who y'all think will win that Halloween night game. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. My gaming channel will be linked in the description, as it always is. And I'll see you guys next time here on Sports Earth.